In this video we're going to deal with business processes. Now, Bozarth and Handfield define business process as a set of logically related tasks or activities performed to achieve a defined business outcome. So a process is just a sequence of activities that are connected, logically connected, aimed at achieving a particular business outcome. A business process is considered as a set of activities that are related and structured in order to meet an organizational goal. So it's a set of related activities within a business, and they're structured and they're aimed at some specific outcome or some goal. And that's what we mean by a process. A process can be visualized as a flow chart detailing the necessary activities involved in developing a product or service to the customer. So it's possible to visualize it in terms of a flow chart. I'm not going to draw a flow chart here. We've done so in many other videos, but essentially a set of connected boxes indicating particular activities. It may have decision nodes built in which require a decision by a manager or by some senior person to decide what is the best route forward. Sometimes when we are moving along in a process, we have to make a decision to switch over to do something else or to change the process in some way. These are decision nodes, and these may involve managerial decisions. But essentially, a process may be visualized as a flow of activities, a certain set of activities, one following from the next, all connected, all related, and all aimed at achieving some particular outcome. The concept of a business process revolves around inputs, the transformation of the inputs, and outputs, which is the, if you like, the end product. And we're going to take this very simple concept here, this point 3, and look at inputs, the transformation of the inputs into outputs. And that's going to be our very basic system. Now clearly, large organizations with many lines of production and many activities to be followed, they will have very complex processes, changing perhaps raw materials into a very sophisticated product at the end, which is the product itself of many activities. But we're going to concertina all of that down into just 3 concepts: inputs, the transformation process, if you like, the production process, and the outputs. The inputs are clearly defined activities, assets and raw materials that produce the final end product. So we know what the inputs are immediately. The inputs are what goes in to make the product. It could be human effort, human ingenuity. It could be entrepreneurship, or it could be a skilled operator with particular competencies and abilities to perform particular tasks. It could be specialist machinery or particular types of machinery. It can be all sorts of inputs, all brought to bear on perhaps a raw material or on a particular task to try to change the basic ingredient into the desired outcome. And that's what we mean by the production process in the context of this talk. Clearly, as I just said to you a few moments ago, large organizations with very sophisticated processes will have many complexities built into their process. However, if we think about it, it still conforms with what we've got here. They still have inputs, they still have an output, and they still have worked on the inputs to make the outputs. So we've got a very simplified structure, but at the same time, this is the basic relationship within business, the transformation of inputs into outputs. A business process is designed to provide efficiency and value added for the customer. So here we're playing more on the word business. Business conjures up this idea of efficiency, the need for efficiency. It may be that the outputs may be produced in many ways, but there would not be business processes because they're not perhaps efficient, they're not structured, they're not organized. So a business process somehow conjures up this idea of efficiency and value added, and the customer receiving a product that he or she wants that fulfills a particular need. The process is aimed at eliminating unnecessary costs and activities. Again, the idea of business is foremost here. It's the idea of cutting out waste, of being efficient, of maximizing output, of minimizing waste. It's a process which is conducive towards efficient use of resources. A business process must begin with aims, mission and objectives in order to achieve the business objectives. Well, businesses must have aims. They must know what they're doing. They must know what they're trying to achieve. If they don't know that, then they're going to go around in proverbial circles. They're not going to produce anything, and if they do produce it, it'll be very inefficient. So they must have a mission or a set of very clearly defined objectives which will drive the organization. That's what gives the organization purpose. Business processes can be ad hoc or cyclical. They can be complex, consisting of sub-processes and multiple activities. So business processes can be they can come in all forms and shapes. They could be ad hoc. The business process could be ad hoc. It could be designed as a one-off. It could be a large project that will only be requested once by a particular customer. Perhaps the government wants some complex piece of machinery produced for some particular task. So it's ad hoc. It's a one-off. It's not something which is done on a cyclical basis or on a repetitive basis. Some companies will make tins of beans. They won't make one tin of beans, they'll make millions of them. Some companies might only produce one of a particular product because it's a large, complex piece of engineering or piece of production. Some processes can have sub-processes. So the product moves along, if you like, the production process, but then has to go into there are sub-processes. There are other processes that are making components, perhaps, that fits into the main product. The main product needs these additional sub-processes if it's going to work. So it can operate on different levels of activity. Business process has become an important concept which outlines an organization's focus on processes, their customers and outcomes, and it does this rather than focusing on hierarchies. So we've come to look at organizations in terms of the processes that they undertake. Perhaps historically we were more fixated with the design of the organization itself, the board of directors, the management structure, the premises, the way the business presented itself, the image it presented to the world. But now we're more looking at the processes that it undertakes, the efficiency of the organization, its credentials in terms of pollution and its care for the environment, its care for the workforce, the aftercare service it gives its customers, the quality of the product. So we're not so much looking at the hierarchy of the organization or the status of the organization. The status is only derived through the experience of the customers. If they like the product, they think it's value for money, it's a good product, it's good quality, that enhances the reputation of the business, not having large and elaborate premises. So the business process has become very important as a way of identifying the business itself. The business process is important because that's what we understand to be the purpose of the business, the transformation of inputs into outputs. Now let's take a simple process. This is the one we're talking about here. We've got inputs leading to outputs. The inputs go through a process of change, of manufacturing, of manipulation in some way. So the inputs are changed into outputs. And even large, sophisticated organizations will do this. Even modern organizations operating operating online, I should say, they will still have inputs. The inputs will be the brain power of their programmers. The brain power of the programmers will go through processes of calculation, of programming, of identifying particular needs and requirements, turning it into an output. So we don't seem to move away from this very basic relationship. And central to the whole thing, as you can see from the diagram, is the word process. So business process is important. Now let's look at inputs for a start. This will be the first one we can look at here. Then we'll move to look at process and output. Let's look at inputs for a start. Now, inputs are the initial starting point of a process. They are the resources that are needed to produce the output. So companies can't magic up some output. They have to use resources. They might have to use metals or wood or some sort of material, or they have to use something, particularly obviously in manufacturing. In the context of services, the inputs will be the human brain. It'll be the ability of the human to satisfy the customer in terms of service in a restaurant, for example. So inputs are the starting point. This is where we start our voyage of discovery in terms of business processes. This is the starting point. This is what is converted into the output. Resources can include raw materials, capital, people, information, skills, knowledge. So resources can be very wide indeed. Skills, turning a skill into some sort of product or into some satisfaction. So even a skilled runner produces a product which is the satisfaction that the crowd see when the race is run. Knowledge, converting pieces of code into a useful application to be used on a computer. Raw materials, converting wood into a table and chairs. The inputs are crucial as they aid the transformation process and ensure outputs and products are of high standards. So the quality of the inputs is also important and needs to be borne in mind. Inputs are not homogeneous. They're not all the same. Not all raw materials are of the same quality. So when we talk about inputs and the transformation of inputs into outputs, we have to be careful. Inputs are highly heterogeneous in many respects. The quality of metals can vary. The quality of wood can vary. The quality of the intellectual capacity of people can vary. Some people are very skilled at being computer programmers. Other people are not good at all. Some people are very good, very talented at design. Other people don't have that ability. So inputs are highly variable, and that must be borne in mind. Now let's look at process. We've moved over here from inputs, we just discussed, into process. Now let's have a few words about process. This is referred to as the transformational stage. This is where inputs are converted to produce outputs. So the process is the transformation stage, moving from one state to another, moving from, if you like, a raw state into a refined state. Now it can be considered as a set of subsystems involving activities. Some systems involve subsystems. Now what I mean here is that if we're producing, let's say, a car, then we can identify the body of the car and so on. But as soon as we get to talk about the engine, there are different subsystems that are required. The electrical system is a subsystem. The different parts of the coolant system, of the ignition system, the locking system, the braking system. These are all subsystems, and these can be produced elsewhere and brought into the assembly. So when we think of a car, we're thinking really of the transformation in terms of the building of the car, putting all the subsystems together and getting them to work in harmony, getting them to work together. So it's often the case that when we think of a product, we should really extend our thinking to include subsystems. And the subsystems will have inputs, transformation, and outputs, the same as the main system will have inputs, transformation, and outputs. But instead, the subsystem fits in to the bigger system. The production is also a process, a subsystem where products are manufactured within the production department. So when we produce a car, as I said, we can envisage the car as being built, being assembled. And it's been assembled from certain items which belong properly within the main system, where the car is going down a line and the doors are being added and so on. But inside the doors is the electrical system that powers the windows and powers the mirrors. Inside the car is the braking system and the fuel management system and the electrical system. And these are subsystems that have been brought in to the main production center to be assembled. A process can also include a maintenance subsystem. For example, human resources maintain employees. Physical maintenance of buildings and facilities. So we have also got subsystems which look at the maintenance of the system itself. So the overall system might need a subsystem to look after it. Employees in a factory or in a company perform functions. They perform processes. But the employees need to be maintained. Their skills need to be maintained. They need to be considered in terms of their own requirements. So there is a subsystem, the human resource system, which looks after the employees. The example here of the buildings. The buildings is where production takes place, but the buildings themselves have a subsystem that maintains the buildings. If the buildings are not maintained, they'll fall down and there will not be production, because the environment in which the production takes place will no longer exist. So sometimes, and it's often the case, that main systems require subsystems to maintain them. Marketing is also a subsystem. Product development, researching, sourcing raw materials. These are all subsystems. Sourcing raw materials, in a sense, doesn't add anything to the value of the product, but it's necessary. It's necessary to know where the raw materials can be found. Product development is a subsystem. Customers require new products, but whilst product development is being undertaken, the whole production system is making the previous generation of the product. They're making the product and selling the product. The marketing system or subsystem is selling the product, and the product is under development in a different part. That's a subsystem. Management functions is an important subsystem. It controls all the inputs, the coordination of activities to achieve the final product. But management itself is not being sold. Management is facilitating the overall production system. So management can be viewed as a subsystem. It's enabling the production to take place, but it itself is not being sold. That's not what is being produced. The management subsystem is facilitating the main system in making the product. Now we move to output, the final one. We've talked about the inputs, the processes, the systems and the subsystems and so on, and now we'll talk about output. The output process determines the types of product and services offered by the organization. Well, the output is what is going to be sold. This is what generates the revenue for the business. So it's important that the company produces the right output at the right price, that's properly marketed and presented to the customer, and has all of the subsystems in support. For example, aftercare service and customer satisfaction is taken into account. Customer requirements and satisfaction is taken into account in the production of the product, so that quality and perception, appearance, design, all of these issues are factored in. The output stage evaluates the objectives which were set during the input stage. So the output system, or the output of the whole process, should ensure that the inputs were effectively put together to make the output. The quality was factored in, as I said earlier. It's important at the output stage that objectives were realistically set and were realistically marketed, so the customers know what they're getting. So the output conforms to what the business said it would deliver. It shouldn't be less. It should meet what it promised. This stage involves assessing product quality and standards, as I said, and if the process stage has produced the necessary outcome. So it's important at this stage to understand clearly what the promises that the organization made were, and whether the output conforms to the promised the output conforms to what the organization promised. So those are the three broad types of processes. Looking at the inputs, looking at the process itself and the sub-processes, and looking at the output. And that's all we're going to deal with in this video, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.